Hi everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar presentations. It's about ETA, the one metric you need to understand your patent examiner. My name is Eric Scarcia, I'm Marketing Manager at LexisNexis IP Solutions, and I want to cover a few housekeeping things before we get started. You're all muted automatically, but please feel free to submit questions during the webinar by using the chat features. We'll try to address them in a Q&A at the end. Presentations will be recorded and will be available together with all our other webinars on our BrightTalk channel. You will receive links to both the slides and the recording in an email this week. Without further ado, I would like to introduce today's presenters. Chris Holt, he's the Vice President of Patent Analytics at LexisNexis, and Megan McLaughlin, Product Director at PatentAdvisor. They have both many years of experience as U.S. patent attorneys and translate that not only into our solutions, but also into interesting content, such as their Better Patents Now podcast series that you can find and follow via our website, LexisNexisIP.com. So thank you everyone for attending today's presentation, and with that, I will turn it over to you, Chris and Megan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Making sure that Megan is on the audio.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, great.
All right, Megan, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great.
Very good. Well, let's take everyone through this adventure that we call ETA. I think a good place to start is by way of background. So, Megan, as you know, I was originally a physicist before I was a patent attorney, and my job was really to do systems analysis, to look at the big picture of things and try not to get too lost in the details. So, it's kind of appropriate that as my career has developed and as you and I have begun to work together, that's kind of what we do with patent offices, right? We're looking at the big picture to understand what's going on the inside. And a black box is kind of the way I think most people perceive the patent office. So you send in your application, it gets assigned to an examiner. You have your interaction with the examiner, which, in a lot of ways seems random or uncertain. But what we're really trying to do is to dig into what's going on inside that black box. So we have U.S. companies, we have non-U.S. companies, many people submitting patent applications to the USPTO. So I want to start with the structure of the USPTO. Now, we're going to use USPTO as our primary example, but we want to emphasize that, half of the applications that are filed in the USPTO every year are filed from outside of the United States. So it's a good example for us to use, and so we will begin there. So the Patent Office in the U.S. is really divided into 8 tech centers. So all of the examiners, when you begin to work at the Patent Office, you're assigned to, one of the 8 tech centers. So one could be, that it is more in chemical in nature or biomedical in nature, whereas another tech center is, more related to computer hardware, computer software. And so, that's the starting place of the hierarchy of the USPTO, is that you are divided into tech centers. Now, inside each of those tech centers are art units. So one tech center, so let's suppose we are in the tech center that deals with computer-related technology. It's divided into groups of art units, and each art unit is a group of examiners. So that's where we're really going to focus today with this metric that we're talking about, is let's look at an art unit, at a group of examiners, and talk about how that group behaves and where your application comes in at that point. Doesn't that seem like a good place to sort of set up shop here, Megan?
Yeah, so, and because it's important to understand that what happens to your application at the U.S. Patent Office is in a large extent dependent upon which art unit you're assigned to, and within that art unit, which specific examiner you're assigned to. Because every examiner has different behavioral patterns that's going to affect prosecution of your application. And so we like to think of it as though there are actually 9,000 plus different patent offices, with each examiner being his or her own specific patent office. And Chris will explain in a little bit, these examiners are driven by a motivational system that's set up by the USPTO, and it can cause their behavior to diverge in a variety of ways. And so as PatentAdvisor, we understand why the variability exists, and we're the sole providers of the one metric that helps you understand where an examiner falls on the spectrum.
Right, and so, this metric is called ETA. And what we're trying to do is to give you a predictive metric for your examiner. So imagine if you have, so a typical group of examiners is about, let's say 20 to 30. So if you have 30 examiners in a group, your starting assumption about how the patent office works is probably that, once I get assigned to that group, the behavior across that group of the individual examiners is relatively uniform, right? They probably all have the same allowance rate. They probably all take about the same amount of time to get through the process. You would think that all of the examiners in the group behave similarly. But in reality, that's not exactly how it works, because essentially what happens is that there are inevitably in a group of examiners, a small number of examiners, let's call it, say, 10 or less, or around, 5 or 10 examiners that have a lot of experience. And those examiners are very efficient patent granting machines. In fact, almost half of all the patents that come from that group come from, those 6 examiners. So even though there are 30 examiners in the group, most all the patents that are issued by the group come from a very small set of examiners. So let's call them the power brokers. So the way I kind of draw this, if I have a whiteboard, is, I kind of draw a circle and I segment a very small portion of that circle for the power broker examiners. And so maybe I put 5 or 6 dots in there. So those are the examiners that grant, let's say, 150 or 200 patents per year. So if you get assigned to those examiners, you're going to be very happy because they tend to allow patents very quickly. And so probably if you have experience with the USPTO, you probably have had the experience that, hey, I get an examiner, it goes very quickly, I get a patent quickly. Now, on the other side of that coin, so now if we take that circle and we segment out another piece, there's another group of examiners of, let's say, about 10 or 15 that are very slow. They are not efficient patent granting machines. They tend to only grant, let's say, 15 or 20 patents per year. So what we're going to show you is that this metric, ETA, is capable of predicting, whether you have gotten one of those efficient patent granting machines or whether you have gotten one of those inefficient patent granting machines. So you can see in this slide that we're showing that the ETA is 13, and you can see that the number itself is in red because we use a system that is green, yellow, and red. So if you have an examiner that is green, you have an efficient patent granting machine. You have an examiner that's granting a couple hundred patents per year. On the other side of the coin, if you have an examiner that is red, you have an inefficient patent granting machine. And so this isn't, let's stop there and think about it, because this is an uncomfortable proposition, because what we're telling you is that when your application is assigned to a group, in a way, a lottery takes place. You know, and that's a little bit scary. So what we're saying is that the quality of the patent that you're going to get and how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost is largely dependent upon where your application gets assigned in that group. And so what ETA does is it tells you whether you have won the lottery or lost the lottery. It tells you whether you have a bumpy road in front of you or smooth sailing ahead.
And something that makes this even scarier and even more uncomfortable is the fact that previously we relied on a metric called allowance rate to tell us how we fared in the lottery. And as you can see on this particular slide, this examiner's allowance rate is actually pretty high, 86%. What that means is that of all the applications that they receive, 86% end up going on to the patents. But the way that allowance rate is calculated is it's equal to the total number of patented applications divided by the total number of patented applications plus abandoned applications. So it doesn't take into account the examiner's pending portfolio, and it doesn't take into account how difficult it was to get that allowance. And so what we've discovered is that allowance rate, it can actually be a little bit deceiving, as it is in this particular example and in a lot of cases we've discovered. So another kind of uncomfortable truth about ETA is that it's much more predictive than allowance rate. It can tell you not only your likelihood of getting a patent, but how difficult the road to a patent is likely to be, how expensive, how time-consuming, how costly. What's beautiful about the metric is that it really is all-encompassing. And I can already hear the skepticism, you know, how is it possible that you can consolidate an examiner's entire history into one number, and that's divided into 3 categories, red, green, or yellow. You know, it seems too simple.
Let's take a step back and, go back one slide, and let's take one step back and talk about why it is that examiners in a group behave so differently from one extreme to the other. And a lot of it has to do with the point system that is utilized to manage productivity of examiners within the patent office. So let's use our imaginations again. Let's pretend that we are all sitting in a conference room. We are all brand new examiners. So there are 30 examiners sitting around a large conference table, and I'm the manager of that group. And so I need to figure out how, because we have a giant, huge stack of patent applications that need to get examined over time. So we need to be productive. So what we could do is I could go around the table and say, okay, look, in the next 2 weeks, Sarah, I would like for you to grant 12 patents. Tom, I would like for you to grant 4 patents since you're not as experienced as Sarah. Now, that would not be a good system because that would be artificially, choosing how many patents to grant, regardless of the merits of the case. And so the Patent Office doesn't do it that way. What they do instead is they give points based on, projects that you complete during the week. So, for example, if you write a rejection or an office action, then you get 1 point. And if you allow a patent, you get a half a point. And if a case goes abandoned on your docket, you get a half a point. If you write an appeal brief, etc. So all of these activities that you do as an examiner are assigned points within a point system. And what we have found is that that point system drastically impacts the behaviors of the individual examiners within the group, as you would imagine. And so if you are a very experienced examiner, and by the way, each year that you're at the Patent Office, you have to score more points within the time period, which is called a bye week. So every 2 weeks, you have to score a certain number of points. And the amount of points that you have to score each year that you are at the Patent Office during your career, you have to score more points. So what happens is that those power broker examiners, those examiners with green ETA scores, they tend to allow lots of cases in order to meet their point quota. And probably there's nothing wrong with that, because those examiners, you know, they've spent years probably with the prior art. They're able to make quick decisions. But really what's important is on the other side of that coin is a lot of the new examiners. So as we alluded to in a previous slide, there are 9,000 patent examiners approximately at the U.S. Patent Office. And almost a third of those, so 2,000 or 3,000 of those, were hired in the last, you know, handful of years. And what's interesting is when those new examiners started, they could have given those examiners, say, 25 cases on their docket. And had they had 25 cases, that would be a reasonable amount of work. But what they did instead is they tend to have given those examiners, you know, more like 100 applications to work on. So a lot of the new examiners say, hey, I have 100 cases on my docket. I don't really need to allow anything. I can just write one office action in every case. And I can really keep this docket churning just by doing, you know, writing rejections. And so that's why, you know, a green examiner may have 100 cases on their docket, and they're allowing a large percentage of them, and their docket is refilling with new cases. So they're churning through a high volume of patented cases. But the newer examiners instead are taking that 100 cases that they have on their docket, and they're just working with those cases, and no new cases are coming in. So if you have an application that loses the lottery and you are assigned to a red examiner, then you have a bumpier road in front of you than if you would have drawn a green examiner. So it's the decoder ring. And let's talk about, as an applicant, outside of the U.S., why is this important to me, right? And the answer is that when you are separated from the chaos that is the patent office, the only thing that you have between you and the patent office is your counsel, whether it be your local counsel in your own country or your counsel in the U.S. And those people tend to just sort of go, they just sort of kick the can down the road. They're just going to keep filing responses. But what they're not going to do is to help you assign a value to a pending application in your portfolio so that you can understand, you know, what is the best way to pursue this patent, and when should I give up on pursuing this patent? You know, what is the potential of it becoming a good asset? And that's really where we want to focus today, is how this ETA metric can transform the way that you see the entire pre-grant patent process.
So
is that a fair summary?
I do think it's a fair summary. The only thing I would add is that ETA actually stands for Examiner Time Allocation, because of what Chris was explaining with the count system. It reflects how the examiner spends their time. Are they spending their time writing office actions, or are they spending their time actually trying to get cases allowed? So I think maybe it makes the most sense right now to dive into some examples of actual applications at the USPTO, so you can understand.
Megan, why don't you explain the ranges of ETA and how we decide whether something is green or yellow or red?
Sure. So a low ETA is good, a high ETA is bad. So I said it's so named because it stands for Examiner Time Allocation, but you can also think of it as the ETA of getting the patent. So what's the estimated time of arrival, if any, of your patent? So a low ETA is good, and a high ETA is bad. It means it's going to take a long time. It'll be expensive with a low probability. So 0 to 2.5 is good. We call those examiners are green. We consider those examiners to be efficient. Then 2.6 to 6 is yellow. That's mediocre. A large portion of examiners at the Patent Office fit into this range. And a high ETA is anything above 6. Those examiners we consider to be inefficient. Those are the examiners like the one you see here with a large pending docket who are just churning cases, writing office action after office action.
And I think a good way to conceptualize the ETA, and even though this is not exactly how the algorithm works, is ETA tells you how many office actions on average does the examiner write before they grant a patent. So in this example of John Doe, and we've taken out the actual name of the examiner, but this is real actual examiner data. This examiner writes about 13 office actions each time they grant a patent. And if they had a green ETA, that might be, let's say, 2. And so if they had a green ETA, that means they grant a patent every time they write 2 office actions. So ETA, the way you can conceptualize it is, what is the rate at which they're granting patents? Because you would rather have an examiner that's granting 200 patents a year than to have an examiner that's granting, only 15 patents per year. And to Megan's point, notice that the allowance rate is almost 80%. So, if you were only looking at allowance rate, you would think that you had an easy examiner, right? But in reality, this is a difficult examiner. You can see on the right there that this examiner, only grants a small handful of patents each year. So yes, their allowance rate might be high, but you may have to wait an awfully long time before it's finally your turn to get a patent. And so ETA is that predictive metric. It tells you the future of your application.
Right. So let's look at a couple of examples of actual applications and what happens in the USPTO, because these examples highlight why it is so important to pay attention to ETA and to use it to evaluate and set expectations for your U.S. counsel. So here's an exemplary examiner. We'll say his name is John Doe again. His allowance rate is only 50%, but his ETA is actually 11. So what this picture is showing here is this is showing the progress of an actual application at the USPTO. Each blue box represents an office action and response. So each of these blue boxes is a rejection. This application got rejected 11 times. And prosecution spanned over 9 years. It included an appeal. And at the end, the applicants ended up abandoning. Probably because after 10 series of negotiations with the examiner, I don't know how valuable those claims would be anyway. If you were looking at allowance rate alone, it wouldn't be so clear why this case had gone so far off the rails. Because the examiner's allowance rate is 50%. It's a coin toss. I wouldn't think it's too difficult of an examiner, also not too easy. The ETA, however, could have prepared you for this. If you had known that the ETA was 11.1 after the very first office action, I strongly suspect that you would not have gone through this much prosecution only to eventually give up.
Right,
so,
or at least they may have chosen to appeal earlier. So when I look at that slide, I'm like, they didn't choose to appeal until very late in the game.
Right. So digging a little bit deeper into this examiner's statistics, you'll see that this examiner is appealed quite often, actually. 27.6% of the time, this examiner is appealed. And that's actually a really, really high percentage. Appeal is an expensive process, and applicants don't like to undertake it unless they think it's going to pay off. And of those 30% of the time, the applicants won 82% of the time. So most of the time that applicants went to appeal, they won. And if you had known that at the first office action, like Chris said, maybe you would have picked an early appeal. But you never would have known that looking at allowance rate alone. But if you dig deeper into the examiner's statistics, you understand why their ETA is so high. So for example, this examiner has a huge pending docket, 190 applications that they are just churning. And there's an average of 4.2 office actions in each of those pending cases on average. So that's incredibly high. And ETA consolidates all of that information into one easy to understand number. We've done the hard work, we've done all the digging for you, and we provide you with a metric that is predictive and that includes all of this information ready to go.
Yeah, Megan, I'll have you go back one slide and just look at this timeline again for a second. So, you know, here we are, it's a nine years of patent prosecution and 11 office actions. So we're easily looking at an investment of, you know, $30,000 to $50,000 in prosecution costs. And so this is where you get in this difficult position as a company outside the U.S. is that, you know, your U.S. counsel is likely to advise you to continue to file responses and RCEs and to continue to negotiate with the examiner. But what we're telling you is that you can know at year 3, the day you get your first office action, that you have a red examiner. You have an examiner that has too many cases on their pending docket, and those cases are not moving off the pending docket. So, you know, you can make the choice whether you want to take a more aggressive approach, like to put the case in early appeal. And, you know, here are our tips for ETA red cases. That on the day you get your first office action, if you have a red case, then you want to make sure that your U.S. counsel is not just going to continue to file responses and RCEs perpetually. You want to be involved in that case and say, okay, look, what can we do to put pressure on this examiner early in the case in order to try to get a resolution sooner rather than later. And so if you take all of the pending cases in your portfolio and you assign the ETA values to them, then you're going to know, you know, which of your cases have a good outlook and which of them have a bad outlook, and to be able to manage accordingly.
And Chris, I want to emphasize something that you said, which is that the most important time to look at ETA is after the first office action. Because even a lot of people don't think strategically until the second and final office action, because it's at that point that you could appeal, you could file an RCE, you could even use one of the U.S. Patent Office's pilot programs. But really, you need to start thinking strategy even at the first office action, because the ETA, the examiner, can affect what types of amendments you make to the claims, what types of arguments you're going to make, and whether or not you're going to request an interview. So
you don't have to be an expert in U.S. patent prosecution to use ETA. It's like an alarm system. So you can say to your U.S. counsel, like, I'm very concerned about this case because it would seem that we have a very difficult examiner. Please explain to me what are my options to be aggressive. So let's do another example.
Yeah. So this example is along the same lines as the first, but it's even more extreme. So this particular application hasn't gone too far in prosecution, but it's still pretty bad. You still have 6 office actions, 6 rounds of negotiations, and you're dealing with an examiner who has an even higher ETA than the first one of 17.2. But the reason that I wanted to show this example is because it's a pattern that you'll see a lot among U.S. patent examiners. So here you see an examiner with an actually very high allowance rate, but also a very high ETA. And the primary reason for that is what Chris was explaining earlier, which is that this is a fairly new examiner. This examiner probably started working sometime around 2016. But the day they signed up with the USPTO, they were assigned a docket of almost 100 cases. Because that helps clear the USPTO's backlog. And what this person has been doing is just churning those cases over and over, issuing office actions, one after the other, in each of these pending cases, and really hardly any cases are actually coming to resolution. So if you look specifically at this examiner's pending docket, which is here, you'll see that each pending case already has a ton of office actions. So what this is showing is the list of the examiner's pending cases. And look at this, one case already has 6, one has 4, one has 5. These are the types of things that go into calculating ETA. These are the types of things that we are monitoring for you and calculating for you. So all you have to do is look at that one number. But so you know, this is one of the factors that goes into the calculation. So I want to give one final example that's on the opposite end of the spectrum. So this example is of an examiner whose allowance rate is in the median range again, about 50%, about the same as the first examiner we looked at. But here, this examiner actually has a very favorable ETA, only 2.4. So if you were looking at, if this was your case, and you looked at the prosecution history, you'd say, okay, you know, 4 office actions, but the examiner has kind of a difficult allowance rate, and it was issued within 2 years. You might actually consider this a win. But I'm here to tell you, it's for an examiner who's this easy, it's actually not. And it's very important that you consider the examiner's ETA here on the very first office action. So what ended up happening in this case was that the applicant responded to the first office action with some sweeping amendments. These were the amendments in response to the very first rejection. They basically rewrote the entire first claim and made it much more narrow. But the reality is, they probably didn't need to do that because this examiner actually turns through pending cases pretty quickly. So they might have taken a less aggressive response here and maybe just tried an interview, maybe tried to work a little bit more with their arguments. But it may be that such sweeping amendments were not actually necessary. And so that's one of the reasons that it's so important to look at ETA from the moment that prosecution begins. So to summarize, Chris, maybe you can help with this. To summarize, what actions do you think you would take if you find that you have a green ETA examiner?
Yeah, I think your green strategy, again, it's like an alarm, but it's like on the other side of the spectrum. So a green examiner is telling you that, look, we do not want to over-amend. We want to be strategic. Almost always a green examiner is more experienced, and you know, talking to them on the phone will help you minimize the amendment. And so, you know, again, you can talk to your U.S. counsel and say, look, you know, we already spent, whatever, $10,000 filing this case, and it's very expensive to file in the U.S. It would seem that we have drawn a favorable experienced examiner, and we want you to be very strategic about, you know, how we prosecute this case early, and not to give away claim scope unnecessarily. And it is unbelievable how many times, and you know, we're beginning to do some studies on this, that, you know, cases where an examiner will rarely ever require an RCE, and people in response to the first office action, you know, are adding, you know, 20, 30 substantive words to the claim. It doesn't make any sense. If you have a reasonable examiner, you might as well use that to your advantage.
And I want to point out that the examples that I've been giving you are a little bit extreme. You know, a lot of times allowance rate will track with ETA, and a lot of times you can tell how difficult their examiner or how difficult and easy an examiner is going to be because of their level of experience. But these are great examples, and they're not that uncommon of when ETA really differs from what you might think looking at the examiner's statistics initially, and why it's so important to rely on ETA.
Yeah, and I want to point out that ETA is tested, you know, so we are able to do reverse regression testing of ETA. ETA is not just a theory, it's a proven theory. So we can go and look at all of the cases where prosecution got long and expensive, and we can look at, okay, look, if you would look at the ETA on the day that you got your first office action, would ETA have been predictive of that long prosecution? And of the cases where prosecution is shorter, you know, would ETA have predicted a shorter prosecution? And so we actually have an iterative process where ETA is in continuous improvement, because we are constantly testing it for variables that go beyond, you know, the obvious. So, you know, we are looking at continuation case versus not continuation case. We are looking at, you know, the types of rejections that are utilized in the office actions. And we are committed to continuing to always pour lots of resources into making ETA a valid predictive metric so that it's easy for you to use and easy for you to use as a portfolio management tool and an outside counsel management tool.
And so along those lines, thus far we've been talking about using ETA to help you manage prosecution and manage a U.S. counsel on an individual case. But ETA is also a great tool for portfolio management. So what I've done here is I took an example company, Sagentia, and this is their actual portfolio, all their applications, and this is how they divide along ETA lines. So 5 of their cases were with easy examiners, 2 were with medium examiners, and 4 were with what we'll call difficult examiners. This is incredibly valuable to know for your business, because what you can do is you can divide these cases into high business value and low business value categories and determine which of your high business value cases you need to be concerned about. So if you have a high business value case that is green, great. Fantastic, way to go. Try to make sure that you keep those claims as narrow as possible. Try to make sure counsel doesn't make too many sweeping amendments. If you have a high business value case that is red, that's a giant red flag right there. You need to seriously consider how you want to adjust your prosecution strategy in this case to make sure that it doesn't end up going completely off the rails, to make sure that the claims don't end up changing too much or that you have to abandon it altogether.
Yeah, and you might even consider a continuation strategy. Could we file another case that claims an invention in the same application that is important, but does so in a way that is completely unique and different in terms of context? So, maybe we claimed maybe we claimed a structure of a medication in that case. Could we instead claim, a method, or could we claim, is there another approach that we could take in order to get another application entered into the lottery, right? And remember that group of examiners. So now if you look at that group of examiners, that circle that we drew, and you put inside there 30 dots for the examiners, and you make some of them green dots and some of them yellow dots and some of them red dots, that is a map of the ART unit, and that is something that we provide within our product, is to say, look, you can look up any group of examiners in the patent office and see the map of that group and to see where your case landed on that map. Did you win the lottery? Did you not win the lottery? Should we buy another lottery ticket? Should we file another application, get it sent to a different group, and take another chance at winning the lottery? The good news is that most of the time you win the lottery, right? Because the highest volume of cases is moving through those green examiners. So the vast majority of your cases will typically be green in your portfolio, but the cost of even a single red case, if you're a small company that does not file many applications in the U.S. because it's expensive, because you only file your most important cases in that market, well, that's fine, but you want to know that the application that you did file is going to be as favorably positioned as it possibly can, right? And that's really what this is about, is how do we maximize the return on our investment in filing in the U.S.
Right, and Chris mentioned we can do this analysis, this ETA distribution analysis for an audit unit. You can do it for your own company. You could also do it for one of your competitors. So you could type in your competitor company name into PatentAdvisor, and we can perform this analysis for them as well, so you can see how things are faring for others in the market, not just yourself. So this is also a very useful tool for competitive analysis.
And I spend the majority of my time outside of the U.S. talking to companies about ETA and about using analytics to guide their portfolio management and their patent strategy. And what I run into a lot outside the U.S., there's a couple of kind of pushbacks. Number one is, we don't file very many applications in the U.S. Well, for me, that means that you're taking sort of, and not to use the gun example and fit the U.S. stereotype, but that means you're using the rifle approach rather than the shotgun blast approach, right? And when you are not firing very many shots, then you want to make sure that you're hitting the target, right? So why would you guess is sort of my question. And, you know, the way we do the pricing with our analytics is that, you know, if you are a company outside the U.S. that does not file that many cases in the U.S., well, the price for our analytics is adjusted to a very reasonable price for you. So our price model is designed to reflect how many cases you have pending in the U.S. You know, how important is the U.S. Patent Office to you? And, you know, there's a lot of use cases of ETA. So I think we've done a good job of kind of explaining the theory of ETA. We've talked about how ETA can be utilized for guiding prosecution. You know, how do we instruct our U.S. counsel in terms of the strategy that take? How do we decide when to abandon? You know, those are sort of prosecution management applications of ETA. As Megan has showed in this slide, this is portfolio management of ETA. So if we have a set of applications, you know, how do we look at all of our pending cases in our portfolio in relation to ETA so that we can properly value them and properly guide our strategy? But ETA really changes almost every aspect of pre-grant patent management, wouldn't you say, Megan?
It does. It gives you a level of expertise potentially beyond what your U.S. counsel is going to have, because you now have this predictive insight into what's going to happen in the case, maybe even before they do. And so it's a great tool for evaluating them, which previously maybe you didn't have. Maybe you had to rely on them entirely.
Right. ETA changes who you want your outside counsel to be, right? So when you are selecting counsel in the U.S., you know, probably any law firm that you utilize in the U.S. can do a good job with a green case, right? They can steer that ship into port. That's not going to be an issue. But what you really want from an attorney or a law firm is the firm that can recognize as early as possible in prosecution that they have fallen into a trap, that they have a difficult examiner, and that they are going to choose a prosecution strategy that's different than just, you know, going with the flow of the water, right? They're actually going to adjust their strategy to reflect the fact that they have a difficult examiner, and that examiner might be difficult for reasons that have nothing to do with the merits of the case, right? Look, we have a new examiner that just is not allowing a lot of patents, so we have to be more aggressive, or else this is going to be expensive and it's not going to end well. You know, another use case where ETA comes into play is, and this is a big question that companies outside the U.S. are asking, is, should I file in the U.S., right? Should we make that investment? Well, you know, a great thing that you can do is to find representative applications in the U.S. and go and look at the ART unit maps where those cases are landing, right? Go and examine what is the likelihood of winning the lottery, right? And how should we claim that invention if we do file in the U.S.? So we know that, Megan, what do the ETAs look like in software areas of the Patent Office that are suspected of being business methods?
Bad.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
on average.
It's a whole ART unit full of red examiners. You know, there are multiple ART units, groups of examiners in the U.S. that are red across the board. So there's no way, I mean this, there are some ART units where there is no chance for you to win the lottery. So you want to think about, you know, when we form our strategy and we decide whether to file in the U.S., is there a way that we can characterize the invention that will allow us to avoid those ART units, for example?
Right, and we do have tools that help you draft the application in a way that you could target art units that are more favorable and try to avoid art units that are less favorable. So that is something that we can help you to do.
Another use case example, there are tools in the market for monitoring when your competitors file applications in the U.S. So when new applications become published, it can be brought to your attention. You know, we do that within our tool, but there are other tools in the market that do that as well. You probably use some monitoring along those lines. Well, what our tool can tell you is it can give you, ETA tells you what is the risk of that application becoming a problem for you, right? What is the relative risk? Because if your competitor has a new application published that is assigned to a green examiner, you have a big problem. I mean, you may want to start thinking about, you know, what is our design strategy going to be in the U.S.? You know, we've got to really monitor this. It's going to be a patent very soon. The claims are not going to change much. But if you have an application that is from your competitor and it's assigned to a red examiner, you know, it's probably worth a wait-and-see approach, because more than likely it's going to get trashed before it actually finally issues. So
right.
That's another example.
Right. So we're nearing the end of our time here. So let's summarize. The use cases for ETA are basically extend as far as your imagination. But you know, some of the examples that we've given are evaluating and setting expectations for outside counsel, managing your own patent portfolio to help you make decisions at a large scale about what to pursue, what to abandon, competitive analysis, right? Monitoring for competitor applications that might be a problem. Did I miss anything, Chris?
You know, and that's really the tip of the iceberg. There are certainly other use cases, and there are certainly components within the tool that support other use cases. Now, we would love to show you the tool in action and really prove this to you. So, you know, if you would want to set up a demo, we have people that would love to go inside the tool and show you in action, because the way the system works is we are essentially monitoring every single application that is pending, granted, and abandoned in the U.S. And we aggregate that information and can show you statistics and patterns that will be valuable to you. So we would love to do a customized presentation for you. So you want to do a plug for our podcast, Megan?
Yeah, so couldn't help myself. So yes, we definitely love to do a customized presentation for you. You can check out our website that has all kinds of information about ETA. And also please tune into our podcast, Better Patents Now. You get to hear Chris and me talking every week about some topic related to patent data statistics. And we only talk for 20 minutes in the podcast instead of an hour.
Awesome. Well, this has been fun as always, Megan. I guess it's time to get back to work. The fun part is over. So here's some contact information. So please reach out, set up a demo. If I'm available, I would love to join the demo. Or if you're tired of hearing me talk, you can specifically ask for me not to join the demo. Or if you like Megan better than myself, you can ask for Megan to join the demo. But we would love to show you how all of this works. And I will say in summary that, you know, this is the way that things will be done, you know, going forward. There are now literally hundreds of companies that are using analytics to guide their patent decision-making and patent processes. And we have been at the forefront of that since 2006. And our goal is to make it easy for you, and that's why we created this metric, ETA. It's as simple as red, green, or yellow. It is really that simple. And you can go deeper down the rabbit hole, look at examiner allowance rates. I'm looking at examiner appeal statistics. There's all kinds of other data, but really transforming the ROI in your own efforts is as easy as red, yellow, and green. So that sounds good. Hope to hear from you, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, Chris and Megan. Thank you for your presentation. It's great. I think there's a very interesting potential for everybody, whether you have a lot or a few applications here. Do we still have time for one or two questions? Is it possible?
Sure. I think so.
So let's say that we're looking at this tool. How accurate / real time is it? So if I'm looking at the ETA now, is it when has it been calculated basically?
You want to take that one, Megan, or do you want me to?
No, I can take it. So we are constantly updating the applications in our database. Every single minute that passes, we are actively scraping this information off of the USPTO's website. Because the USPTO has bandwidth that limit how much information we can grab from their public website, that translates to us being about a month or two behind the USPTO on average. Now, that's just an average. We have a way of knowing which applications are likely to get updated, and so we'll be checking those applications more often. In applications that have already been patented or abandoned, we're not checking those applications as often. So it's as real time as it possibly can be given the bandwidth limitations at the USPTO.
Yeah, so we take being complete and up to date very seriously.
Okay, what you mentioned we were looking at the really red examiner, and you mentioned some of a cost or something. They went in 9 years or something. What would typically be a ballpark figure around these costs a year, for instance?
Yeah. I mean, if you have one case that gets stuck with an examiner that's drawing out the process, that's going to cost you at least an extra $20,000. And, you know, those extra costs can be short-circuited very easily. Now, in most cases, if you have the tendency to fight with the examiner, those costs can easily reach, you know, $80,000, $60,000.
Oh.
So it's really the potential. It only takes, you know, one single case for you to identify as being a problem case and correcting the outcome to save a substantial amount of money.
Okay. So ETA is basically the metric to know how well your examiner is doing, but it also tells you kind of how well your counsel is advising you, right?
Well, it gives you a benchmark, right? So it's telling you if we don't do anything, how is this case likely to go, right? If we don't do anything different. So, you know, if the examiner is red, if you don't do anything different, then, you know, it's likely to be a long, drawn-out prosecution unless either you intervene or your outside counsel is wise enough to intervene. So really it's about setting expectations. If I have a green case, I expect my U.S. counsel to get the case completed quickly and get me a great result. If I have a red case, you know, I may be a little more sympathetic with my U.S. counsel, but I want to make sure that they're doing something other than just going with the flow. I want to see them taking a strategy that is aggressive early in prosecution.
I actually read here that ETA could also mean hashtag exit the attorney. So if
yeah, it could be.
Okay, so maybe a last question, if you really have a dark red art unit, what can you do? So let's say that I'm going to use this tool to check where I am, and it's really red. Do I have any other option than just to abandon, or?
Sure. So the two options at least come to mind. So you could appeal the case. Our tool also provides appeal statistics, so you could see how applicants have fared in that process historically. So one answer may be that you just need to bring the case to appeal, go over the examiner's head. Another option in U.S. practice is to file a continuation application. The trick there is that you're going to need to redraft your claims in a significant enough way that it'll get you to a different group of examiners. And I think I alluded to it earlier, we do have tools to help guide you, to help guide that drafting process to get you to a more favorable group of examiners with a continuation application.
We see a lot of companies outside the U.S. that are shy about appealing. And, you know, most U.S. companies are not shy about appealing. So a great use of the metrics and the red, green, yellow system is to give you the boldness to turn to appeal early in the process. Because if you have an examiner that has 100 cases on their docket and they're just going through writing one office action in each of those 100 cases, and it's going to take them 3 years to do that, you need to do something to get your case to stand out from that group, and appeal is a great way to do it. So you can set appeal criteria and strategy for your company using the red, green, yellow system.
Okay. So maybe there are some other questions. Otherwise, okay. So, well, this brings us to the end of today's webinar. I would love to thank you, Chris and Megan, very much for your time and attention, also to tell us about this very interesting and new approach. Thank you for attending attendee. If you have any questions, or if you would like to learn more about this and how it can affect your patent portfolio, please feel free to contact us via email, via our website, via LinkedIn or Twitter. And here are some contact details. We will send you, maybe tomorrow or the day after, we'll send you the slides and links to the recording so you can re-watch it from the comfort of your comforting chair, I would say. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.